Hey Doug, how are you?
Hey, Melissa, how's it going?
Good. How are things with you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
We're just rocking along this summer.
Yeah, it's going too fast.
Yeah, we have a new NSF grant we're starting, which we're excited about.
Awesome. What's that?
Amy, Barbara, and it's with IU's actually the same program through HydroLearn,
Mhm.
but we're building out a platform for teaching engineering design to elementary kids.
Very cool.
It's
Huh.
exciting.
How did
Took a
that
while.
present I use?
Well, we're involving our pre-service teachers. So a big component is not just actually the main component is really how do we better support pre-service and in-service teachers in teaching engineering design. So that's the undergrad component is really the key part of it.
Gotcha. I'm gonna eat my lunch until I see people start coming in.
Sounds good. I like your backdrop there.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see the city skyline.
Yeah.
How are your boys doing?
They're doing great. Caleb is in a sophomore now in mechanical. My second son, Aaron, just graduated from high school, so he's starting in computer science at UL in the fall. He's excited about that.
I thought he wanted to be a herpetologist.
He did. But he's really a musician, and I think computer science and music is really his passion right now. We actually still have a leopard gecko that we're trying to pass along to someone. So if you want it, let me know.
I think I'm good.
Okay.
Hi, Alfonso. How are you?
Hello, Melissa. Hello, Douglas. How are you guys?
Hello. Oh, doing great.
How are you doing?
Not bad. So, somewhat not too hot day here in Utah.
In Utah. Are you at Utah State?
Yeah.
What is that tapestry? Is that a tapestry or a painting behind you?
It's a tapestry.
It looks like Bolivian artwork or
Well, it's from the Andes Mountains. Yeah. Yeah. My wife and I are from Peru.
oh right. I
It's
was
a-
close-ish.
Yeah. It's a tapestry of her hometown in the mountains.
What town is that?
Just call it Tarma. It's in central Peru.
Nice.
I spent about a year working in Cusco many years ago, about 20 years ago.
Oh, nice.
I enjoyed being there.
Yeah, Cusco is getting bigger.
Hmm.
It's a crowded city now, very crowded.
Nice. And then after that, I taught math actually in a school in Santa Cruz, Bolivia for about another year. So I spent about 3.5 years in South America. A lot of it just kind of roaming around, it's such a beautiful place.
Well, there's plenty of beautiful things to see around South America.
Yeah. There's a big stats education conference next year that's going to be in Argentina. And I'm not stats ed, that's my husband's field, but I'm really excited to go because I've always wanted to go to Iguazu and see the waterfalls.
Yeah, it's an interest. Yeah, it was. I've never had the chance to. I traveled more in the U.S. than I traveled back home. So
Oh.
I know so many states here, but when I was back home, I didn't. Something that I need to fix.
Yeah, well, maybe after the pandemic is settled down.
Oh yeah, it's going to take a while though.
Yeah, how are things in Peru with the pandemic?
Hello, David. Things are going slow. They are still vaccinating people 50 years older, 50 year and older. So we're still in the 10 to 15% of the population.
Mhm.
So this is going to go for a while, probably until summer of next year.
Yeah.
So it'll take a while.
How are you doing, David? How was your holiday?
I'm doing great. Holidays were great and everything is good. And this is my first Zoom meeting for the day.
That's nice.
Well, all of the other meetings I had were face-to-face, which is really good.
Ooh.
We're acting as though we're back to normal and hopefully not being dangerous.
I'm sure everyone you're meeting with is vaccinated.
I hope so. We're not allowed to ask.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Ahmad.
Hey, how are you
So
doing?
Melissa, quick logistics question. When I present my slides, do you want to just keep going the same slide set, or do you want to stop sharing and have me share my screen? Which is easier?
I think it's easier if one person just shares the whole time. One thing we could do is I could give you remote access if you
Okay.
want to be able to navigate through it that way, or I could just go.
I'll just tell you next.
Okay.
And then,
And then did you want me to pull up HydroLearn itself at all, or?
I was not planning on that,
Okay.
but we could if you want. I mean, maybe we should go through the slides and then pull up HydroLearn and explore that module.
I'll make sure to have that, the website open and ready to go then.
But that's where, yeah, then you're navigating that. So you're more or less in charge of, I can tell you where to go, but you're more or less in charge of sort of showing the way.
Yes, that's true.
Which is totally fine. We just need to know who's going to be doing that.
Yeah, I can drive.
I'll just, I'm just finishing lunch here.
No worries.
We'll be ready to go when it's time, in a minute.
So Doug, just let me know when you want me to advance.
Okay, sounds good. Melissa and Imad, should we go and get started, or do you want to wait a few more minutes before we kick it off?
I think we maybe another minute or so, and then we can get started, just to allow people to flow in.
Okay.
Jenny, would you drop the link to the Google folder in the chat, just in case as people are waiting, they might want to fill any forms if they haven't already done so, they can take advantage of this time.
And maybe Jenny should also move the slides we're going to show into that Fellows folder meeting slides, so people can see it. Or just
I guess for the respect of people's time, we can probably get started.
All right. So on behalf of the entire HydroLearn team, just wanted to welcome everybody to this meeting number 2 as we get started. We're just going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do, and we're just going to get right into it. So Melissa, can you advance to the next slide? So this is our agenda for today. First, we're just going to go over all the goals we have for today's session and do a quick little check-in. We're going to define active learning. We're going to experience or learn more about another module, so you can help elicit what are the characteristics of a high quality module. And then we're going to give you some time for you to work in your partner groups to try to get some traction on the topics that you're going to be using as you build out your modules. So next slide, please. So our goals for today are first to build community, help you develop a relationship with your partners that you're working with in your team, but also to become a little more familiar with the HydroLearn platform. Secondly, we're going to define, what is active learning and authentic learning, at least from the perspective of the HydroLearn team, and then have an opportunity to identify those characteristics of a high quality module through a demo of a module that we're going to show shortly, and then give you that time to begin brainstorming topics within your partner teams. All right, so just to get a little check-in so we can learn a little bit more about each other, we're going to have you type this into the chat to, so describe a pet, describe your pet or roommate as a coworker. So for example, my kids have this new kitten that we got recently, and every morning when we go out to drink coffee, it likes to attack our feet. So I might describe that cat, Toby, as my coworker is attacking my feet every time I go into the office to drink coffee. So if you can think of something like that, and go ahead and just type it into the chat. And I'm going to type mine in as well. Okay, Melissa says my coworker sleeps on the couch in my office all day. That sounds very familiar. Oh, cool. Eileen says my coworker showers me with kisses every morning. Will be very, very inappropriate if she was not a dog. That's hilarious. Okay, awesome. These are hilarious. My coworker makes for great lunch conversation when we're stuck in the house working all day. All right, eggs every morning. That's awesome. Hyperactive coworkers, we experienced that before. And I can definitely relate to watching soccer all day. My coworkers, at least kids are watching the soccer games going on right now.
Haroon, I think if your coworker provided you with like cooked eggs every morning, that would be super awesome. But the raw eggs is a different thing altogether.
Oh, this is funny. Y'all are hilarious. All right, very good. So are we ready to go on, Melissa?
Yeah, so we're going to start today, as Doug mentioned in the agenda, but we're going to really be talking about active learning. What is active learning? And bringing that together too to think about active learning in the online and virtual world. This is kind of a cool place to be in our time frame in history as society, because we're now at a point where everyone has taught virtually. And so I think, and so we can kind of talk about it from a different perspective. So Jenny's going to drop a link to the Padlet in the chat, and the Padlet looks like this. And there is a plus mark down here, an addition symbol down here in the right-hand corner. So when you click on it, it'll give you a Post-it note. In the title, you want to put your name so we know who's saying what things. And then you're going to answer then below that question, what is active learning? So I'm just going to type eggs because Haroon, I have a feeling it's going to be stuck in my head for the rest of the day because I think it's so funny. As long as it's got the dotted lines around it, it's not posted yet. But when you click outside, now it's posted and everyone else can see what I wrote. If you're reading other people's and you like them, you can always upvote them. You could also downvote them, but that probably seems unnecessary. And then you can edit or delete or expand your posts. Oh, it looks like maybe they just start showing up even when the dotted lines are still there. So go ahead and take a minute and jump on that Padlet. The link is in the chat or it's in the slides if you have the slides open. I'll give you a couple minutes for that. I'd also like everyone to know that I'm drinking nitro coffee. This is not an imperial stout, just so to be transparent. And of course, active learning has kind of a wide array of examples you could think of or different definitions. So feel free to put more than one Post-it. So Anne or David, did one of you add this arrow here? Because I've not seen that done before and that looks really
Not me.
Anne, was that you? Nice. Will you show us how to do that, Anne? I've not seen that before.
That means that I have to remember what I did. I think I clicked on my post and a little menu came up and it said connect. And then I selected the one that David's post because it seemed relevant to that.
Okay, so I should be able to put a new one. And then if I want to.
Yeah.
Connect to a post. Very cool. So if there's a post that yours connects to, the way that Dave and Anne's connect, you can connect it. Ooh, gives you lots of options. Thanks for teaching me something new, Anne.
Anytime.
So if you feel you've done your post-it, what I'd like you to do next then is to read through what other people have posted and go ahead and like things that you agree with. And feel free to make connections between your posts and other people's the way that Anne just showed us how, where you can connect on those dots and connect to a post. Oh, I see Martin is using the connection. I see lots of great connections showing up here. All right, well, I'll leave that up for you all, but I'm going to use that as kind of a launching point. And I want to start with what Alex said. So he pointed out the contrast between active and passive learning. And some of you did this in different ways, but he used the word passive. So that's where I'm going to bounce off what he said. If we think about passive learning, that's really a sit and get. If I'm listening to a lecture, I'm not necessarily actively, cognitively engaging in what's happening. So active learning isn't just about doing with your hands, but it's about what's happening in your brain while you are participating or in a lesson or learning. And so if there's an active learning situation happening, then my brain is actively processing, making connections. And so that looks a little different than passive learning, where I'm just expected to absorb and not necessarily consider critically all the information that's being presented. So there's lots of ways to incorporate active learning in-person learning and face-to-face learning, anything from stopping during a lecture to ask students to turn and talk to one another about a question. My father is an economist and he consults with governments internationally. And when I taught him about turn and talk 20 years ago, he said it was a game changer for his presentations, right? Just a simple thing, having students turn and talk to one another. But of course, that would be kind of a simpler or more low-hanging fruit type activity that could be integrated into lecture. And then hands-on activities would then run the gamut to, field-based work and labs. So there's all kinds of things in between. So HydroLearn is really based on sound pedagogical practices. We spent a long time considering what were the pedagogies that we wanted to make sure were integrated in the platform before we built it. And so we've combined research on active learning methods in addition to authentic online learning to create these the setup of HydroLearn and the resources within HydroLearn to help you create modules that are based on these premises. So when we talk about active learning methods within HydroLearn, what we've really framed this around is authentic, high cognitive demand tasks. And HydroLearn is really well suited to collaborative and cooperative learning. So I'll talk to you a little bit today about those two in the educational research literature are similar, but yet distinct. And we'll talk about those separately. And then also bringing together ideas about authentic online learning. So pulling that authenticity throughout. And I remember from our first session that many of you talked about the things about HydroLearn that would make you want to adopt a module. A lot of those things had to do with how authentic the tasks, activities, and skills that students were being asked to do were. So we talked about this a little bit. Active learning is anything that gets their cognition actively working and processing the content. So there's so much research on this. Our external evaluator has said, if this were a medical study, you would no longer be allowed to, active learning has been shown to be so effective that they would discontinue use of any other treatment, right? And so in education, we really want to discontinue the use of any passive learning and make sure that all of our learning opportunities we create for students are active learning. There's a ton of research on it. This is research from engineering education that has indicated that it improves student achievement, pass rates, attitudes, self-esteem, personal relationships. So there's a ton of research in engineering education specifically. In education more broadly, of course, there's even more, but even within engineering education, we see these effects on students. So remember, there's lots of different types of active learning, but we're really focusing within HydroLearn, the type of active learning we're thinking about is authentic, high cognitive demand tasks. So when we talk about high cognitive demand tasks, like how do we know what that is? How do we know what classifies as high cognitive demand? We're going to talk about this so much that you're going to not want to hear the term high cognitive demand again by the end, but hopefully you'll be super familiar with it. So within education research, we talk about Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy, and actually we're working from the revised taxonomy, has put different types of cognition into 6 different levels. And so where we consider these 2 levels, understanding, remembering something, like basic recall, like I can remember that 2 + 2 is 4. I don't have to process it. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to analyze anything. Or understanding, I also understand why 2 + 2 is 4. So I have that deeper understanding of it. But so understanding and remember, we consider as the lowest levels of Bloom's taxonomy. That doesn't mean that they're not important. That doesn't mean that we don't need them, but we also need the higher levels. And so that's why we think about all these different levels. And then once you understand and remember things, we can build on top of those with some mid-level cognitive demand, which is requiring students to apply information to new situations and to analyze situations. And then at the top levels is when we're asking students to create something new or to evaluate different perspectives, right? To justify. And so we're going to talk about these, like I said, a lot throughout the next 2 weeks. But this is when we're talking about levels of cognitive demand, you're going to see this version of Bloom's a lot. And so when we give students high cognitive demand tasks, if we think about a traditional textbook, a lot of the problems, they come at the end of the chapter, there might be a problem set. And a lot of times they're asking students to remember, to recall information from the chapter. They may be asking them to explain ideas from the chapter. There may be a few apply problems where they're taking maybe an equation that was given earlier in the chapter and applying it to new data. But usually the data are super clean, very pretty. They have all the numbers, not really like what we see in the real world, where students are having to dig deeper in analyzing what's happening, evaluating the data, and creating new solutions. So I had characterized these 2 as mid before. Sometimes they're split like this with high and low, and then sometimes these 2 are considered mid. So a task, when we talk about high cognitive demand tasks, those are a problem that we ask students to solve. And tasks, like I said, can represent different levels of cognitive demand, and they should. We should be asking students to recall and remember what words mean. We should ask them to understand the concepts, but we also want to ask them to hit objectives and cognitive levels at these higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. All right, I'm going to pause there for a minute. What questions might you have for me about high versus low cognitive demand? All right, let me frame that in a different way. Would you use the reactions to give me a thumbs up if you have ever heard of high and low cognitive demand previously? Right, I see some thumbs up coming in. That is great.
Well, I have a question. Yeah, like, is it better to have all the 6 different levels when you're designing a course, or you should just focus on the high cognitive, or the top 3 steps? Like, I understand that the bottom 3 are kind of like the building blocks where we get to do that. So, or is there any relative weightage, like how we should distribute the course in terms of the different activities and assessments? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that in every course, you want some from high and low. It doesn't have to be each of the 6 levels, but that distribution would depend on the course. So for instance, if you're teaching a senior level design course, you're going to want more at the higher level. You're going to assume they know a lot of the background that they're coming in with. If you're teaching an entry level course, you're probably going to have more of them in the lower, but we don't want to be exclusively low cognitive demand, because if we don't ask students to take what we're teaching them and analyze it or evaluate it, if we're not asking them to do anything higher, then they're not going to make all the connections that they could. So great question, Kazi. It doesn't have to be all 6, but we do want from both sides of that pyramid. Any other questions?
Melissa, it also depends on the school you are teaching in. You know, if you are teaching in MIT, then maybe you can go to create and evaluate. But you know, in a lower ranked universities, then there is no way to go up, you know, to a high cognitive demand all the time, or even most of the time, because simply the students don't understand.
So I wonder if they never have the opportunity to create, if they'll ever then be able to create.
I mean, they are not smart enough to create. I mean, they just want something to learn easily, apply it, and remember, and that's it. So this triangle is correct, but it's also a function of the university you are teaching in. It depends on the rank of the university and the understanding of the students.
Yes, I would jump in here and say I would be really cautious about assuming students are a priori not smart enough. I think you may have students who are less well prepared, that you may have to spend more effort on the lower level cognitive demands. But I think that almost for anybody, if you really want them to learn, you should try and push to get up to the higher level. And I mean, I think that even if you're at a so-called perceived lower level university, you should still try and do the best to get the students to think and learn by giving high cognitive demand tasks somewhere along the line.
Sometimes if students are unsuccessful at the high cognitive demand tasks, it may be that they need additional support in achieving those high levels, but without ever giving them the opportunity to achieve at those levels, we might be robbing them of the opportunity to show how creative they can be.
It's also worth saying that we're educating students to, go out into society. So no matter where they're coming from, I think we should, try to educate them as best we can and give them the best tools that we can to go out and make the world a better place. Coming from a state level university, I had a pretty strong reaction to that last comment. So,
yeah, and Said, I may, I can understand, or I do agree that the students also play a role in how these levels are applied. There's no question about it. But I think I would modify your statement to say that it's a function of the instructor more than institution. Actually, it's really on the instructor to be able to build this hierarchy of learning levels, and it takes an effort from the instructor to actually be able to deliver those learning objectives or learning levels. So it's a combination between the student and the instructor has to push as far as they can.
Can we?
Haroon, yeah, go ahead, Haroon.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm kind of comparing it with physical workout. So I have a question related to that. Can we look at it in the same way? You don't bring a new person and just overload them with weights in a workout environment. They have to go through lower weights before they can take the higher weight. So is it true that low cognitive demand tasks should be done first before we can take the students to high cognitive demands?
So That is a perspective that some people have in the mathematics education research, which is the domain that I come from. There has been a flip in the last 15 years in how we consider this. And so what the research is currently showing is that if you start with a high cognitive demand task, then students are motivated to pick up some of those lower cognitive demand skills so that they can accomplish the high cognitive demand task. So that actually, if you start there, then the students want to do the memorization and the learning of those kind of foundational skills. So there are some people in math ed who are still doing it in the way that you've mentioned, kind of starting with the lower cognitive demand, but a lot of people have flipped it on its head. And actually in engineering education, they've done that too with problem-based learning. Problem-based learning activities start with a really high cognitive demand task, and then you pick up the other objectives as you go. Great question. That is a great question, Alyssa, if they've been verified by neurologists. I don't know the answer to that question, but I would be happy to look that up for you. Eileen is asking if apply can be a high cognitive demand task as well. So apply, it depends. So apply as it's written here and the way we typically think about it is you just take something you've learned and apply it in a very similar but new situation. So I take this equation maybe that I've learned works in this situation and I'm applying it to a very similar situation, but maybe at a different time point. Whereas when you're analyzing, that's the next step up where you're deciding if you should use that, if you're deciding if something else would work. So the apply is considered a little bit lower. All right, excellent questions. I really appreciate everyone kind of jumping in there. So as I mentioned,
I don't know if you got to, I guess Alyssa had a question following hers about learning styles. Do you want to say anything about that now, or will we get to that later?
Sure. So there is in the 1990s, there was some research on learning styles. I'm sure you've heard of visual, kinesthetic, and auditory learners. There's been considerable research done on different learning styles that actually indicates that learning styles are quite unstable and that no one person has one learning style. So people learn in multiple ways. It depends on the situation and the work that they're doing. I'm not sure if that addresses your question though, Alyssa.
Just could be an interesting intersection to think about how these different levels interact with the learning styles, but I didn't know that it's fluid. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is one of the things I work really hard to dispel because people love the idea of it. And so there is a ton of research that actually shows it makes no difference to learning if you try to match someone with their learning style. So it's like one of the biggest myths that we can't get rid of. Also, left and right brain, there's no research supporting that anymore. But there has been some work done around this. So I don't know if you've heard of multiple intelligences, but there's a theory that people's intelligences can be, that there are multiple intelligences. There's musical and verbal and visual and mathematical, and there's 9 of them. I never remember all of them. I always forget 2. But some people have done work where they make a giant matrix crossing the 9 multiple intelligences with the 6 levels of blooms, and they create tasks at all the levels and then have students pick. But generally, there's not a lot of research supporting the theory of the multiple intelligences, although people like it and it has some, like it feels like it makes sense to people. And creating those matrices can be just kind of a lot of work. So there's not a lot of research in support of it or denying it either. It's more theoretical. Haroon, great question. Go ahead with your question, sorry.
Yes, my question is about the pyramid itself or the triangle. So is this how the Bloom's taxonomy was presented at the get-go, or this is how it has evolved over time? I'm just wondering, based upon your idea how they have flipped it over, if these things actually have this order and they should be maybe presented in a different way or thought about in a different way.
So great question. It was originally presented as a pyramid, I believe. The difference is that these two, create and evaluate, were in opposite positions. Evaluate was previously considered at the highest levels when it was originally created. And then people had lots of what I would consider mundane conversations, and then they flipped it around, right? The aspect of the pyramid that I think is helpful is that at the end of the day, even within a high cognitive demand task, there are a lot of things you have to remember and understand in order to do that. So the creation part of that is maybe much smaller than the other cognitive sources that you're using. I like how you all are really analyzing this. All right, another question, Kazi.
Yeah, I think that flipping classroom example you mentioned, I read about it like earlier today. So my question about is like the flipped classroom exercises where students engage in or like involve in solving problems or analyzing or creating things in the classroom, and they're asked to do the study outside the classroom. That's like the definition of flipped classroom is, where the traditional style was you get the knowledge and do the homeworks at home. The flipped classroom is, you know, you study on your own and then you come to the class and do your hands-on exercise. So how exactly students react to that? Like, do you think it's too much for the students to, you know, go through the materials by themselves and then come to the class and then work on it? Like, how do they, I understand that there is quite a bit of literature suggesting that it helps, like 12% increase in passing rate based on 225 studies. So that's pretty convincing. But my question is in terms of how students feel about it. Like, do they have like an opinion that, okay, this is too much, too overwhelming, or they actually enjoy this style?
Yeah, great question. So it certainly depends on the student and what they're used to, but typically if students have come to expect teaching to go in a certain way, and then you do something different, right, they can be a little jostled by that. I find especially as students get older, they have certain expectations that they're more open to. However, so there are definitely some recommendations about if you're going to do something that's outside of the typical kind of structure of teaching, outside of what students expect, then you really want to be upfront with students. You want to share with them the research that supports why you're doing it, and tell them why it's important to you kind of from a philosophical stance, and then they're more likely to be receptive to it. We all know that, I'm sure we all know or have experienced as ourselves that when we want things to go a certain way and they don't, then that kind of emotional barrier can create a barrier to learning. So the flipped classroom can be really supportive of student learning. And the reason is because then the teacher is there to support the high cognitive demand activities, which, as Syed was mentioned, can be challenging for students sometimes. So if you're there to support them during those activities, then they're more likely to be successful with them. And then these low cognitive demand activities, it leaves that students to do that on their own. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but generally anytime you do something different, you have to make sure you give a rationale for it to support students in making that transition.
No, I totally agree. And I was also looking at one of the videos posted in the HydroLearn like 101 module, and there was a faculty talking about it. Like usually in her second lecture, she describes what she's planning to deliver and in which way. So that kind of helps the students to know that, okay, this is the approach the instructor is taking. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, adult learners always do better when they understand the rationale and the purpose behind what's happening. Undergrads are questionably adult learners or not, but they tend to fall into that category. Eileen, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. We have at my institution, we've been implementing a lot of flipped classrooms, and the very first class when it was done, it was, you know, it took a lot of explaining, and I'm the department chair now, so I see all this course evals, and now the students ask for it. And if it's not done in a class, they're saying, you need to do this class like so-and-so does their flipped classroom. So our students love it now, and they actually demand it. They don't want lecture classes. They complain about it, and they suggest to faculty that they should flip their classrooms. So right now they just love it. They really like it and they expect it. So
awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us, Eileen. So as I was mentioning, we're kind of framing HydroLearn around high cognitive demand tasks. And high cognitive demand tasks are really one, you can implement them independently and individually, and a lot of our HydroLearn faculty do choose to do that. But another thing that you can do that I would encourage you to do is to think about having students engage in these tasks in collaborative or cooperative learning situations. So collaborative learning is group work, right? Basically, we've all done it. I'm going to put you in a group, you're going to do stuff. Cooperative learning, on the other hand, is very structured group work. It can build students' interpersonal skills. It can promote interaction. But what's really important about the way that cooperative learning is set up is that it's set up for positive interdependence, so that the students have to sink or swim together, that they work together, so that there's both individual accountability and group accountability. And when we set up positive interdependence, and HydroLearn 101 gives more specific on ways to do this, then students are more likely to participate, right? You don't get that like social loafing that happens in group work where one person doesn't do anything and still gets credit for it. When you have that positive interdependence, then they kind of all are dependent upon each other. And so cooperative learning can be really helpful in supporting student growth. So here's some kind of research. I believe this is a meta-analysis that Prince did in engineering education, and found that an average student in a traditional class had a grade of 75, in a class with collaborative learning had a grade of 81%, and a class with cooperative learning had a grade of 85%. So not a huge difference between these two, but still added growth from having that positive interdependence and groups pushed to work together. And then the last part I'm going to bring together for you today is this authentic online learning. So authentic learning is the idea of involving real world problems, using real tools of the trade. One of the reasons so many of the students who interact with HydroLearn really like it is because they always mention in their interviews or in their surveys at the end, you know, I love that I got to use HEC-HMS or HEC-RAS, and I know that's a tool I'll be using in the future, right? So knowing that they're using tools of the trade and solving real world actual problems that engineers are kind of dealing with is very highly motivating for students. And then online learning, the online learning nature of HydroLearn, which we started before the pandemic, allows for students to progress in a self-directed way. They can do it at whatever time works for them. They can monitor their own progress. We have check your understanding questions that we encourage you to put throughout so they can check to make sure they're understanding things. And because those modules will be available to them even after the course is over, they can always go back and continuously learn. Also, once they're aware of the HydroLearn platform, we find that people take courses that they're not registered for just because they want to learn more about it. We actually have several engineers, practicing engineers, who are enrolled in different HydroLearn courses because they want to learn more about these skills and technologies. So we've brought these two kind of components together to create authentic online learning through HydroLearn. So in this way, we've embedded real world problems and tools into this online learning environment. So we're bringing together these authentic tasks. So authentic tasks are a subset of high cognitive demand tasks, which means that they are both high cognitive demand. They create, evaluate, or analyze is what we're asking students to do. But they're also real world problems and use real tools of the trade. So those are, when I talk about an authentic task, I'm talking about all of those things. So one example of an authentic task in a HydroLearn module that we're going to look at in just a little bit says, imagine you are a scientist or engineer at the consulting firm tasked with designing the detention basin for Dry Canyon. Discuss the pros and cons of each design option. Comment on the effect your design outflow capacities might have on Logan River. Consider the location of the detention basin, what might be lost or gained by moving the detention basin. So you can see lots of questions asking students to evaluate and justify different options. And also putting them in this kind of realistic situation that an engineer really might face, but not just a situation, but telling them, imagine you are the engineer, right? So putting them in that kind of person's shoes or having them wear that hat. And then along with that, having them use authentic tools of the trade. And these are just some of the ones that we have embedded in our different HydroLearn modules. Any questions about authentic online learning before we kind of have a view of another module? Ozzy, I don't know if your hand is up anew or if that's still up from before.
Oh, that's an old one. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, if a question comes up for you, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to David now, and he is going to share a module with you. And as you're watching, as you are watching David present, what we're going to talk about at the end, so what we're going to ask you to think about is what are the characteristics of this module that make it, keep hitting the wrong thing, that make it a high quality module. So what are the characteristics that make it high quality? And then as you're watching, you can have this window open separately. Jenny, can you put the link to the poll everywhere in the chat, please? So we're going to put this link in the chat, and as you're watching David present, you could have this up in another window, or you could have it on your phone, and you can submit your thoughts, and then we'll launch the conversation from this slide at the end. All right, why don't we do this? In the reactions button, so if you click on participants, is that where it is? Where is reaction?
Bottom of the screen.
On the screen?
At the bottom, usually.
At the bottom, you should have a button that says reactions. Would you give me a thumbs up if you have the poll everywhere open? And you're ready to go. That way I'll know. All right, I see 4 thumbs up. So I think we have a few people who are still probably getting that open.
You have to be careful. They seem to time out after a while.
They do seem to time out. All right, well, I'm going to assume we've got most of those thumbs up, and Jenny has put the link in the chat. So if you need it, you can still copy it from there. And then as we're going through, you can go ahead and respond to that. You should be able to respond as many times as you would like.
Okay, so hello everybody. I'm David Tarbotton, and I'm here at Utah State University. I missed the first seminar of this workshop, so it's good to start getting to know you. And this is a little bit of my story with effectively active learning, authentic learning, and online learning. And I'll talk you through this module and give you some of the thoughts that were behind it, and hopefully we'll sort of critique it and learn a little bit from it based on your comments. This was first developed as a HydroViz module, and that was when I first got involved in collaborating with Emad on developing online learning material. And that was developed using a different technology. And one of the limitations of it was that while it captured a lot of the things that we are advocating here, the question we had was, okay, well, that's great, but I want to adapt it. I want to change it to a different watershed. I want to do something different with it. And the HydroViz technology required basically web programming by Emod's team to make any changes, and that was impractical and not scalable. So HydroLearn was developed with a new NSF proposal on the platform that we're using from edX that allows you to actually take content that other people have developed and make it your own. So if you go to the next slide. Melissa introduced the problem that is being considered, which is a problem typical of what engineering hydrologists might face. And in the context of active learning, we've got the concept of learning by doing. And we framed this as learning by doing the hydrology just in time to solve the given problem. So if you go to the next slide, the problem was flash flooding. And this was a setting where, if you look at the map at the top right, there's a mountain watershed. And you can see on the left where it's flatter, there's urbanization that's encroaching right up to the mountain. And the city identified that there was a flood risk there and constructed a detention basin to protect those new houses. So this module is framed around, what if you'd been the design engineer responsible for actually designing that flood protection? At the bottom, you can see a Google Earth image, that's the one on the right, and a photograph of the detention basin that the city actually constructed there. So this gives an opportunity, at least for the students in Logan, to go and see what was built and think about how they might have designed it had they been responsible for doing this. So if you go to the next slide. So solving the problem requires a number of skills. So these will fall at different places in Bloom's taxonomy, quantifying watershed properties, quantifying precipitation, runoff generation, hydro-runoff computation, and flood protection design. So those are all the sort of things that we sometimes teach in hydrology classes. But previously to me, starting with this sort of work, I taught hydrology probably the old way, that you first teach the processes and then you hope that students can apply it. Well, here we wanted to try and learn these things just in time, framing the problem right at the beginning. And Melissa was mentioning that math education had sort of flipped to having the problem as context being an important motivation. So the module was constructed around this. So if you could click again, Melissa, there's a number of arrows that come. So in terms of the quantifying the watershed properties, there's a section on watershed properties as well as soil properties. In terms of precipitation, there's a section on that. In runoff generation, there's a section on that. Hydrograph computation, and then putting it together with using HHMS to design the detention basin. So if you go to next, so this sort of gives a plan for the implementation and the way students progress through this module in terms of their learning. So there's an introduction that really just states the problem as I tried to frame it here. Then there's the section on watershed properties, becoming familiar with dry canyon, precipitation, runoff and infiltration. And on the right, a lot of those, on the right, below where it says data acquisition and analysis by hand, a lot of those are activities that students perhaps learn best by doing the sort of work by hand rather than in a sort of a canned computer program. So there's the sort of sections 1, 2, 3, and 4, inflow and outflow hydrographs. Even that is sometimes learned best by doing it by hand. But then when we switched over to using HHMS, basically we showed that HHMS is already set up to do many of the things that often are taught to students working by hand. But this shows them how to do it more quickly with a CAN program. Hopefully builds confidence in them that the CAN program is executing what they know is the process. So they actually understand what the program is doing and can do it correctly. And they then go through the design storm, hydrograph steps, infiltration, use unit hydrographs, and then they use HIC-HMS for reservoir routing to evaluate different options. So if you go to the next slide, so here are some screenshots from what the students are exposed to. We're using the USGS StreamStats tool to delineate watersheds. So this allows a student to click near the outlet, and then the tool will delineate the watershed, help students learn what a watershed is and be able to identify one in any part of the country where StreamStats is applicable. Unfortunately, it hasn't been deployed everywhere, but this takes some of the tedium out of what might have been watershed delineation from contours, while still helping students learn the concepts. Then what was next? So then, if you think about needing a design storm to have as input to, yeah, I mean, if you have a flooding problem, your first question might be, okay, so how much rain is there, and how do I do the calculations to figure out how big the detention basin needs to be to hold the runoff from that rain? You then have to think about, okay, so how do we measure precipitation? Where do we get the data? What sort of area averaging methods have been developed and are used in practice? Then we get into the sort of precipitation frequency statistics, what they mean, and how you can get them from the database servers that are available, for example, from NOAA, to be able to develop a design storm. So this provides just-in-time learning of many of these sort of precipitation concepts, hopefully motivated by the real problem. If you go to the next one. So after designing the storm, then you have to think about runoff generation, infiltration, and that requires knowing something about the soils. So there's an opportunity to explore soil properties, the concepts of runoff generation, and in the module we talk about saturation excess and infiltration excess, and then go into some of the details of the green amped method. And we also talk, and this as shown there on the right, the unsaturated zone and saturated zone in soil profiles. So you wouldn't have necessarily thought that these are all topics that feed into the design of a detention basin, but students are learning them as they go along. Next one. So once one's calculated the amount of runoff, then it comes into the questions of timing. So concepts like time of concentration that might link back to watershed and soil properties. And the way we approximate that with concepts of unit hydrographs and synthetic unit hydrographs, and the way a tool like HIC-HMS can implement those calculations to produce a hydrograph from a design storm. So this screenshot at the bottom is one of the outputs from HIC-HMS that students might be using or seeing if they were to work this themselves. So the next slide. So then you get to how does a detention basin actually work? And it is a small dam. In this case, it's dry under normal conditions. When there's a large rainstorm, the idea is that water would flow into it, and storage would build up, and the water would be released through this outflow structure. That's the one at the bottom right. presumably at a lower rate than the water's flowing in, with the difference being what's in storage. And therefore the outlet works, well, the peak of the flood is reduced, and the outlet works that accommodate the flood can be smaller. So there's sort of discussing that as a set of concepts that the students need to grapple with, as well as maybe the sort of trade-offs that might be involved, because you could build a really large detention basin and reduce the peak considerably, or have a small detention basin and reduce the peak not so much, and possibly accommodate it through larger outlet work. So there might be budgeting and financial considerations in evaluating different alternatives that still satisfy protecting the people who live downstream. So in this module, we try to keep it simple and just sort of evaluate a few alternatives, but the door's open for students to evaluate more using HMS as a design tool. So if you go on to the next one. So the result is, hopefully, if the students get it right, or if you believe that the engineers who did it originally got it right, a practical solution similar to something that's actually been built. So students can think about their calculations and then go and see what was actually built. And also think about some of the uncertainties in the hydrologic knowledge that's involved. There's a lot of variability in precipitation, and it's not necessarily always clear what should be the design storms. Infiltration requires knowledge of the soils, which are sometimes hard to get. The statistics involved in looking at the data, runoff generation, unit hydrographs, and hopefully students end up picking up the basics as well as applying it in the context of this problem. Was there any more slides? I think that might be it. Okay. So these are the words that people have typed in. I didn't know it made a fancy Wordle.
Of course, I set it to make a fancy Wordle, David.
Nothing but the best.
So I guess I'm happy to, I guess I always feel maybe a little bit sheepish presenting this, because it's always introduced as an example of a good module, and I feel that may be presumptive. It's for you to evaluate whether it's any good, but it was my best efforts. So you can take it for what it's worth, and hopefully you guys can learn, can think of ways of making your modules in the way you help students learn even better. So are there any questions or comments or reactions? Or we could actually also show the module in HydroLearn if, I don't know how we're doing on time, Melissa.
Yeah, I think Eileen has a question for you, Dave.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I noticed at the beginning it said time effort was about 15 hours. Is this, would you implement this like without the students having any prior knowledge of any of these processes? Because 15 hours seems like not enough time.
So I think we've actually, as we've implemented this, we've found it takes more time, and that's probably something we should actually update in the module. We do sort of implement it. Sometimes we implement it in stages. So it comes part of the way into an engineering hydrology class. So students have learned some concepts of hydrology, some concepts of mass balance. While we've sort of thought that ideally it would be possible to learn just working with the content in the module if students engaged with it, the sort of culture, at least here at Utah State, has been that the students sort of want to be lectured to. So we haven't gotten the sort of flipped classroom approach really accepted. So often I end up lecturing material that is sort of straight out of the module, and they could have learned it by reading the module, but they end up learning it. Well, we don't know whether they actually learn it from me reading the module or whether they pick it up from the lectures.
And if I may add to that, this is one of the longer modules that we have on HydroLearn, and it's definitely one of the good ones, you know. So, and I think, like Dave was saying, you don't have to cover all of it in the classroom in one course. You can pick and choose from it. And I think when I ended up using this, I ended up actually cloning the module and customizing it according to my needs. So I trimmed it quite a bit to make it focus on specific topics, and I reposted them on HydroLearn. You'll actually see some of this very same module, recustomized and posted in HydroLearn as a smaller. So there's one module on runoff generation. There's one module on rainfall runoff processing, things like that. So, and I think maybe Melissa will get to that later on in the presentation today on the expected length that we would want the group to produce at the end of this workshop or hackathon, or did we already cover that? The expected length of the module that we think could be reasonable for students.
I mean, but truthfully, as I think about it now, that 15 hours is a significant underestimate.
No, I don't know.
I was going to say, this is like half a semester for me in my class.
Yes, it is. It is. And I'm not sure if it says 15 hours. Does it say on the web?
It does say 15 hours, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so
no, that's definitely.
It might be thought of it. Yeah, it needs to be revised.
Hi, David. This is George, and I just one question regarding this real world problem. Actually, I wish I have this kind of complete real world problem with, say, the final engineering solution, so we can use that for the teaching purpose. I just wondering, say, how do you get this kind of the example of real world problems?
Well, so in this case, I lived nearby, and the city was building this thing, and I went to. I thought, well, this is how did they design it? Did they design it right? If you go and hike around this watershed, you actually see that it seems there's never any water in this detention basin, even after the biggest rainstorms that have occurred in the last sort of 20 years. So there was a little bit of grumbling. Is this money that's been well spent? So I figured that I'm a hydrology professor in the city. I should be able to answer this question somewhat more quantitatively than just the grumbling that people are doing. And I knew how to do watershed delineation, and I knew that hydrology taught the theory of doing this design, but how would I actually have designed it? So started building exercises around how to design this. And then eventually I went to the city engineer and actually got the HMS models that the Army Corps of Engineers used in doing this analysis. But I think if you look around near where you live, there's lots of engineering problems that are being worked on, and you could find cases that serve as learning examples.
Yeah, great. Thank you, David.
So I would also want to say something relative to what Imad said about him taking parts of this module and building other modules. part of what we are trying to do with HydroLearn is have the community of instructors be more collaborative and learn from each other's good learning exercises. So we don't want all of the work that we put into putting together a good exercise to be, say, captive or only available in my own lecture notes and to my own students, but to have people collaborate and share with each other as colleagues what are good learning tools. Just as we collaborate in research, I think it's a bit of a problem in the field that we collaborate a lot in research, but everybody's more or less on their own for teaching. And I think if we can be more collaborative with our teaching, we might do a better job. And I'm hopeful that HydroLearn can maybe help with that a little bit. Right, so some of the comments are good. If we find an existing project that's not perfectly designed, students could reflect on ways to improve it. So students should think about whether the results they are getting support what is actually there being tax money well spent, or whether is it actually sufficient, or is it too big? Any other questions? You had the module open, Melissa, or whoever was driving.
I see somebody dropped industry tools or something like that in the word cloud. So maybe the person who put that, maybe they can speak to the importance of incorporating industry tools. I guess I cannot read from the word cloud, but and do you have plans for this workshop or for developing your modules to incorporate some of the industry standard tools? I know in the past people used PC Swim, definitely HMS and RAS. And these were very well received by the students. Sometimes the student, after they graduate, they come back and say, this was one of the best projects I worked on because I was able to learn this and this, and it helped me with my job. So there are these also satisfying factors that come after the fact.
I was hoping to use PC Swim, and I actually found out you can get a free educational license from them for your students if you use it in a classroom. So
yes, that is true. And I encourage you, Eileen, there are 2 modules, I think, on HydroLearn that use PC Swim, if I'm not mistaken. So check them out. And the best, I mean, an ideal scenario, if you take it and re-customize it if you want, you'll be surprised after a while putting your module online that people are taking it and using it and modifying, and you don't necessarily know about it until sometime later, and it's very actually satisfying, at least to me.
So Melissa, so this is the Dry Canyon module, and if you click into, say, why don't you click into module overview, Melissa? So there you can see, if you sort of scroll down, this is the table similar to what was in the slides, and the explanation of the structure. So this is mostly information for an instructor, but also for a student to know the context of why they're being asked to learn the material in this way. you can sort of page. So one of the things we'll be working on quite a lot in this workshop is learning objectives. So how to write learning objectives so that students know what the goals are, and that so that you align the activities with what you're expecting students to learn. So being explicit about that is one of the themes that we'll cover a lot. So right at the beginning of each module, there's a need to effectively state the learning objectives, and there's ways to write them, and I hope these are written in a good way. But typically they have a construct, a sort of a premise. Using the UST StreamStats tool, the student will be able to delineate a watershed, so what they'll be able to achieve at the end, and it's something active. We try and avoid saying the student will understand what a watershed is, because that's hard to evaluate. But if they're able to delineate it, then that's the thing that they've learned. If you flip through some more of these, you'll see some of the other tools. So we saw briefly at one of them, it said that there was check your understanding type activities, and because Melissa's not actually logged in as a learner registered for this class, it doesn't show it. So quite a lot of the content is sort of freely and openly available, but for some of the content, especially if it needs to keep track of sort of giving response to answers, the system requires that you be logged in. Any student can get an account, so that's not really a barrier. It just means that they have to go through that process. But here, for example, it gives you a sort of a check your understanding, sort of on the way check. So there's a question, a something type rain gauge increments by depth, and you would have to say, is that a weighing rain gauge, a float rain gauge, tipping bucket, and you can think what the right answer is. And why don't we click one of them? Why don't we, yeah. So it's probably best for you just to go in and explore this by yourself to get a sense of the sort of things that you can build into your modules.
I have a question or a comment. This is so impressive. And I'm just wondering, like, how long has this course been around? And is this something that you have edited over the years, or like how much effort would you say went into producing this? Working on it?
A lot. So this course has been around probably for maybe 6 or 7 years now, maybe more. So it came about when Emad invited me to be part of a proposal with him to NSF's undergraduate learning program, where he had developed the initial HydroViz platform and now wanted to propagate that to other institutions. And he and I had chatted at a conference, and he invited me in to be one of the other institutions that this effort was expanding to. So I got to develop this module as my contribution to that NSF funded project. And initially, it was taught separately from being anything on the web. The content was just written and the problem was just written in the sort of normal way that we develop problems and hand out paper assignments to the students, and then they had to hand things in. And then some of that got built into the Hydroviz website. Then we taught it a third year, and we refined the web page based on what had been done the previous year. And so it developed over several years of me sort of delivering it in my hydrology class.
Yes, and Dave, and I would add to that too, there's a lot of iterations, like David said, that you would not, I mean, we kind of use it as our learning vehicle to understand what works best for the students and for the instructors to adopt something like that. So big parts of what we're trying to convey through this workshop was inspired by our work in that module. You know, how do you provide support to students, you know, videos, instructions in between tasks? How do you provide incremental support? What does the instructor really need to adopt something like this in their classroom? So it was also a learning mechanism for us to debug and figure out what works and what not. You know?
So there's a question from Varun. Were you able to get feedback from students specifically for this module? And I guess Melissa gave a general answer, but specifically for this module, we did actually collect feedback and write a paper about it. And that paper just got published recently this year. It took a lot of iterations to get this paper through the review. There should be a link to it on the about page of the module, Melissa, if you can, you may be able to find it.
I think it would take me forever to find it.
You have to not be logged in the course to get to the about page, which, or you have to just type about in the top where it says course.
No, it's actually also listed on our HydroLearn.
Oh, it's also listed in the publications part of HydroLearn.
Right. Yes, and I'm going to put a link to it in the chat box here.
Wonderful.
If I can do that, actually.
So anyway, there is a paper that was published in the International Journal of Mathematics Education that reported on some of the surveying of students in this from this module. And this was a learning exercise for us because we were not, I guess we're not on the in crowd with this journal. So it took a lot of effort and revision to finally get it published.
And I would argue that that was pretty typical for mathematics education. And so if you're on a tenure committee, a university level tenure committee evaluating education faculty, it takes us a very long time to get anything published. That's just a personal aside. All right, Emma, do you want to talk us through some of the characteristics that we're really looking at as we look in these modules?
Sure, I'll try to do my best here. So
I think you're on the wrong slide though for the, there we go.
Right. And I guess many of these were already on the word cloud slide that you guys all put. So that's really great. You can see here relevant content. I guess relevant here can be, interpreted in many ways, relevant to ongoing problems in society and relevant to maybe job and workforce development. So, but we find that whenever you pick something on that the students can relate to directly, like flooding, for example, that's one big theme, droughts or climate change, or it always kind of helps the students stay motivated and excited about the work. Authentic problems, I guess Melissa talked about high cognitive demand tasks, and I think that Dry Canyon, you've seen that it takes you all the way from calculating, simple formula all the way to designing and comparing designs and critiquing designs and things like that. Learning objectives, like David said, we would like to have very well written learning objectives, and I think the workshop will walk you through that. The platform itself has some tools to help you build those ones. I always fall in that, you know, I always like write the learning objectives and then I forget about them later in the module. So it's almost like when you're writing your paper, you write your introduction and you write your objectives, and then you present your results and analysis and you forget to check, did I really deliver on the learning objectives or not? So the concept of backward design and forgot the other one, Melissa put me back on track here, but linking the objectives to the assessment, to the activities, constructive design, right?
Constructive
really
alignment, yes.
Constructive alignment. That really, if you pay attention to that, you will end up with a very well-connected module and a powerful module, I believe. Engaging and accessible delivery of content. I think the module that we have seen also last week, the previous meeting from Austin and Tyler, I think it's a good example of developing module with engaging and accessible delivery of content. So I encourage you to go back and check those ones, videos, engaging images, and engaging maybe quizzes along the way to keep the student engaged. And alignment, again, alignment between the learning content, the objectives, and the activities. That's also a key to a high quality module that the students will enjoy, and also the instructor will find to be very effective in how they teach it. It will reduce a lot of the friction that the students have. We all, I mean, I personally speak to my personal experience, we all want to introduce problem-based learning, and we all want to expose the students to high-level tasks. But if we don't do it right, it actually ends up backfiring, and it creates a bad experience for the students. So, and that sometimes creates a bad public PR, you know, for this type of approach. If you don't do it right, it actually can hurt really bad, and you'll get bad evaluation because at the end of the day. So. I guess that's Dan, or who goes on next here.
Yeah, hi all. So I just wanted to jump in and talk just briefly about some expectations for your modules. So as I go over these, go ahead and put your questions or comments in the chat as well so we can address them. The first thing to consider is that you are developing a module, not a course. And you could probably look at what Dave presented as definitely a lot larger than what we're expecting you to create. In fact, I just wanted to say something about that. As I recall, a few years ago when we were conceptualizing HydroLearn and the HydroLearn proposal, part of the decision to use this modular open EDX platform for building these things was so that people could adapt and revise other people's courses a little bit more easily. In the previous version of this system, it was very difficult. You'd sort of create a course and put it out there, and it was very much a sort of final published thing. And I remember David talking about how challenging it was for him to get small edits into his Dry Creek lesson put out there. And so it's pretty exciting now that you have the ability to take something somebody else has developed and reuse it. And one of the ways that we can facilitate reuse is by having things be sort of done in more bite-sized chunks like modules. So what we don't want you to do is take an existing course that you've already created and you have a bunch of learning material and just upload the whole course as one gigantic module. Think of it in terms of a 1 to 3 week period that might be used in a traditional semester-long course. Hopefully, if you do that, then other instructors can find your module and say, oh man, I totally need, this looks like a really great watershed delineation. This looks like a really great introduction to EPA net, or a really great introduction to hill slope hydrology. And I can take that and factor it into my 16-week course and use that in a 1 to 3 week period. Having said that, and sort of keeping that in mind, it's important that your module is standalone so that it could be easily adapted. So in other words, by standalone, here are a couple of key points. You are all sitting in your own university environment, and you have specific resources. You have Computer Lab 204 down the hall in the Brown building. And we don't want you talking about computer lab 204 down the hall in the Brown building as part of your module, because that makes it less useful for other people to use, right? You also have, you know, Julie, the IT specialist. So we don't want you saying in there, check with Julie to get the copy of the data, because that doesn't help either. Or you might have other resources. For example, many of you have Moodle or Blackboard or Canvas or something. So try not to refer to Moodle or Blackboard or Canvas specifically, and specific resources. Try to refer generally to resources that are available on the web. And if you do need your students in this exercise to go to like submit something online, what you can do is say, once you've completed this task, fill out the answer sheet and submit it using your online submission system at your university. And then when you are teaching your course, and your students get to that, they know, oh, it's going to be Blackboard, great, or it's Canvas, and they know how to do that. So that keeps it a little bit more generic so that it can be used elsewhere. Make sure that it's also not dependent on other classes or modules aside from expected prerequisite knowledge and training. So this is partly why we've asked you to do this as a team of 2 people from different universities, because it makes it, let's say, it's less easy to put in stuff that's focused on your university or your classes when you have another person looking over your shoulder going, wait a second, if you say this is prerequisite on BYU's civil engineering 114 class, then it's harder for me to use it over here at Utah State. So try not to make it prerequisite on other stuff. Having said that, there may be some like basic prerequisite knowledge and training that you could put at the beginning of your module. And you could say, this is an advanced course in hill slope hydrology. Therefore, it is expected that the student have already taken an introduction to hydrology. Or it might be that this is an advanced course that requires that you have some GIS experience. And that's fine. Just say an introductory class to spreadsheets or an introductory class to GIS would be valuable or even required before taking this class, rather than specifically like listing a course number or another module. And then on bullet number 3, as you're building this, think about organizing your sections by topic and sort of relate each section. So you're going to have multiple sections within a module, and you can relate the sections to each other. So section 2 can build on section 1, and 3 can build on 2, and so forth. And honestly, they should be. It would be nice if they are related and they do build on each other. These sections can be somewhat standalone. So think about, like, if you're going to put in a section 1 that introduces some basic concepts, you might allow the student to jump directly to section 2. But we'll leave that up to you. If you want to sort of require them to work through 1 to get to 2, that's fine. In other words, if section 2 is you've collected this data and you've analyzed it in section 1, and now in section 2, we're going to have you make a map of it or draw some plots or graph it or analyze it, that's fine. But just make it clear that at the beginning of section 2, you need to have completed section 1 to get the data to do section 2. So those sort of interdependencies within the module are great. We just don't want you to have interdependencies from this module back to another module, or even worse, another course at your university. Any questions or clarifications on this sort of module versus course and standalone stuff? Okay, I think that's pretty clear and should be easy to implement. And then my second slide is about expectations and work effort. So as you saw, the dry creek is sort of, if you're fast and super efficient, you can knock it out in 15 hours. But it's probably a little bit longer. I didn't hear what you finally said, Dave, as far as like really how long it's taking your students, but 25?
I'm probably 40.
Yeah. On the higher side, yes, on the higher side. I tried it myself, I use it, and you can literally spend the whole, half a semester easily, which is great. I mean, it was very helpful to me actually in my class, but again, for the reasons that Dan said about, adaptation and modularity, I think the shorter these things can be, the better.
It's been a while, but I think it took me it took me about 6 hours, well, probably about 4 hours to just sort of carefully read through it and make some notes without actually doing it. So we want your exercises or your modules to be closer to that 10-hour level of effort to complete. And you will have to evaluate that yourselves, because, and then we are going to review your modules, and if during the review process, if we look at it and say, oh gosh, that actually was sort of like a 2-hour module, we can get back to you and either have you expand it or at least change the expectations for the students. But yeah, sort of in that roughly 10 hours to complete. Imagining 2 to 3 sections within one module. 3 is sort of has been somewhat typical. If you're working together as a team, you might divide that labor up a little bit. So you can frame your module with your partner and then divide the effort by section. I've seen some of the teams sort of build section 1 together, and then sections 2 and 3, they divided the effort to sort of focus on something that they were more expert in. And then once you have done that, at least even skeletonized your section, it's really useful to meet with your partner and compare what you've done and then improve it so that it flows. Because any of you that have reviewed a lot of journal articles, you can immediately tell when sort of the first author wrote part and then the second author wrote part and the third author wrote part, because it suddenly changes voice, it changes grammar, it changes everything, and you're like, whoa, wait a second. We don't want that to happen in these learning modules. So you can, I guess we're asking you, even though it makes sense to divide the labor, to meet and compare and kind of review each other's sections and improve the sections so that they flow nicely together. And then finally, I've got a couple of pictures of equally yoked oxen here. This is an important concept to just really try to be equally yoked. We have had cases in the past where if you do a lot of programming, you've heard of this like cowboy programmer concept where somebody just says, no, I'm taking this thing and running with it. If you've had students work on team projects, you always have like the one student who's like, I don't care what the rest of you are doing. I'm going to do this and succeed, and sort of drag the other students along with them. There might be one student actually sitting in the wagon there on the right. This could be either a reference to the old video game, the Oregon Trail video game, or it can be a reference to some of my ancestors working their way into Utah back in the day. But you don't want to be the one riding in the wagon. You don't want to be the one oxen that's doing all the work. Work together and be a team. And I don't know what else to say other than that. I mean, honestly, we'll have no way of knowing if you were a team or if just one person did the whole thing, but we're just going to hope that you will be a team and work through this together and be equally yoked. We're excited to see the results. David is going to ride in the wagon. Okay. I think he had to like break a leg or something to ride in the wagon. Or you could have just given birth, but that might be a little tricky.
All right, on that note, thanks, Dan. We are going to spend a little bit of time, about 15-20 minutes, working with your partner now. Hopefully this conversation today has got you thinking about your content and your topic, what you might want to explore. As Dan said, we're going to urge you to aim for a small chunk and not a giant module. We find those have better uptake and use by other faculty as well. And so Jenny, would you put the link for the folder in the chat again? You'll find in our shared folder, if you haven't saved it yet, once you open it, you can add the shortcut to your drive by clicking on that down arrow there. So it'll show up in your own Google Drive. You could also add it to your starred if that's helpful to you. So in here, you'll notice there's a folder called Team Folders. That's where you're going to go today. And every group has a folder. So you're going to go into your folder, and from there, they're empty. So you can create a new doc or a spreadsheet or however you want to do your brainstorming. But our goal in this next 15 to 20 minutes is to start generating a list of possible topics in your Teams folder. And then the other is to, once you've come up with that list of possible topics, to create a list of the characteristics of a high quality module. That's what really has been our focus today, that you intend to include in your module. And I'll go ahead and put this in the chat so that everybody has access to these goals. So in just a minute, we're going to put you in your breakout room so you can start this. What questions do you have for me before I send you into your breakout rooms?
Melissa, there's a message there from Beverly Wemple wanting to say hi.
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you, Beverly. Yes, we'd love for you to say hi.
Could we go into gallery view instead of being on your slides for a minute?
Absolutely.
And is Ahmad still there?
Yes, I'm here, Beverly. Thank you.
Hi, Ahmad. Do you want to say anything to the group about Quasi? Like, I'm not sure how much this group of people knows about Quasi.
Well, Beverly, I was hoping you would do that, but I can introduce you briefly, and then you can take it from there.
Sure.
Yeah. So Beverly is a colleague of mine that I interacted with her through Quasi. She will talk more about that. We work together on a committee for education and outreach that Quasi has among many other committees. And Beverly now is the current chair. I finished my term last year. I'm sure she will take the committee to much more exciting directions. And I invited her to meet you all, and can I talk about what the committee does and maybe what Quasi does. I may also invite the executive director of Quasi just to come and meet you all and say a few things about Quasi. So Beverly, thank you for joining, and feel free to share any thoughts that you may have with the group.
Sure. Thanks, Ahmad. I'll be quick because I know you all have a limited time and want to get into these breakout groups. I'll just say hi and thanks for the introduction, Ahmad. Quasi is a consortium of universities. I think David was probably involved in the early establishment of it also. So there are member universities around the country. If your university is not a member, but you work broadly in the water field, you might consider looking at the website. It's Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences, quasi.org. There is an amazing repository on Quasi's website of videos. So when we all went remote last year, I was teaching a snow hydrology course and I was able to fill 2 weeks of content with Quasi videos by like leading snow researchers in the country while I scrambled to figure out how to teach the rest. So I would really encourage any of you to check out Quasi's webinar series. And we have funding programs for educational activities, grants for graduate students to go to other institutions. We have a series called Let's Talk About Water, which funds faculty to bring a film to their campus and organize an event around it. And there are several other types of funded activities. And we're sort of moving into a phase now. We did some work last summer to think about integrating in undergraduate institutions more explicitly. The Quasi bylaws previously stipulated that member universities had to have a graduate program in hydrology or water resources. And the bylaws of the organization have now been changed to allow primarily undergraduate organizations to join. I'm at a University of Vermont that has graduate programs, but most of my teaching is to undergraduates. So I was pretty interested in growing some of what we do towards serving faculty like you all, particularly faculty that are teaching undergraduates, and sort of growing the participation of undergraduate students as a pipeline into really good graduate programs. So because your time is limited, I'm happy to field a question or two, but I don't want to take up a lot more of your time. I'll just say that the kind of work you all are doing with HydroLearn is a really important resource to the community. When I went up for promotion to full professor, I actually asked the director of Quasi if he'd write a support letter. And I would encourage all of you, if you're going up for promotion actions, ask Ahmad or David to write a letter that talks about how you're contributing to the broader community, because that's the kind of thing that your department chair or your dean might really like to see, that you're contributing to this broader enterprise of building our community. And I'll also invite you, I'll type my email into the chat if any of you would like to learn more about Quasi or just want to talk to me. I'm happy to talk to any of you.
Well, thank you so much, Beverly. And Quasi also has been supportive to our activities through HydroLearn, and we continue to talk with them about quasi supporting the long-term sustainability of HydroLearn and making it really a community resource that everybody can benefit from. So thank you so much, Beverly. Again, I think she volunteered for answering a question or two if you want, but appreciate your time, Beverly. I know you had a busy day.
No problem.
And building on what Beverly said, we always happy to help if you, I guess, promotion, that's something I didn't think about before, but people always approach us for like collaboration on proposals or even just writing a support letter for proposals. We have done that in the past. It's really rewarding for us if one of the fellows like you, after this workshop or a year from today, come back and say, I'm writing that proposal and I would like to include some element of HydroLearn just as a support. We don't have to be on the project, but just to show that HydroLearn can help you in your research, whether it's an education grant or a research grant, that's really a good success for us as well.
I would also say on that point that from the standpoint of if you're thinking of writing a proposal to NSF, if you can show under your broader impact section that you're going to develop educational materials and deliver it to this sort of formulated enterprise of HydroLearn, that would give you a little bit of a leg up because it's now a recognized platform and it would demonstrate that you have a clear plan for how to disseminate educational material that would reach a larger audience. So that's a good point that Ahmad makes.
I have a question. Do you encourage like incorporating HydroShare with HydroLearn, like for building the models? I'm an active user of HydroShare, so I was wondering, since it's sponsored by Quasi, so do you recommend that? Like, have you tried that or anything?
Yes, and there's a number of modules that do that already. So I could easily show you some. The one by Belize Lane on physical hydrology is probably the most extensive use of HydroShare.
All right, thank you. I'll definitely check that out. Okay, thanks.
I'll sign off so you all can move on, but feel free, any of you who are interested in talking more about Quasi's education outreach activities, to be in touch, and Ahmad's a great resource on that too.
Thank you so much for joining us, Beverly.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, we're going to go ahead and jump into the breakout rooms again. And just a reminder of we're working on possible topics. And we will start working with those topics on Monday. So you want to kind of get there by Monday if possible. So Jenny, would you go ahead and open the breakout rooms for us, please? We'll spend about 11 minutes there. Great question, Nate. Yeah, it is possible to bring in open source materials or other things if you have permissions. If you're in your rooms and you have a question for us, just do the raise your hand or call for help, request help, whatever that button says. All right, I see lots of people going into their rooms. Jenny, I think we have a few people who need to be moved into rooms.
Yes, hold on, let me assign Anne.
Master, did you see the notification asking you to join a breakout room? I'm gonna make sure it popped up for you.
So Jenny, also, I would rather go to the breakout room where Louis, Scrap, and Lightbody and Kazi are going to talk about their module.
I just put you in there, Dave.
Okay.
And Jenny put herself in there. And are you with you're with
I
Louis?
should be in that room and I'm not, and I don't see a breakout room. Oh, there it comes.
There you go. Perfect. All right. And Carly, can you tell me again, who's your partner?
Carly Phillips is actually a new graduate student at UL.
Great. That would be why I wasn't recognizing the name.
Yes, she's very new.
So I got this new gray background, so it gives me a good virtual background, but apparently my teeth are gray because it keeps going on top of my teeth.
I know, there's always weird stuff going on.
Okay, maybe she's better. We didn't notice.
Driving me crazy all day. You didn't notice it?
Not
During
until
one of the
now,
sessions,
here.
they were like red. And I was like,
Should I join the group that I'm working with?
yeah. So you are with,
The 2 urban hydrology groups. They can at least know who I am. I don't think I'll be too much help to them.
Well, it's room 1 and room 2 are urban hydrology. So room 1 is Maruthi Bhaskar and Alyssa Starry. Oh, is she gone?
no, Elisa's here.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the other room is Aileen and George.
Do you have a preference, Belize?
No.
I might send you to Maruthi and Alyssa because I need to ask George a question real quick.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'll be right
Good
back.
job.
All right. I'm gonna go to a room as well, Jenny.
Okay.
Hey, how are things going in here?
Hi, Melissa. Hi.
Yeah,
Our real partners are not here.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, both my partner who is living, who is from Australia, he's not here. And then, yeah, Alex's partner is not the team worker, is not here either. So they put us together, but this is interesting to learn now, like what Alex's module is going to be about and then what my module is going to be about. So, yeah.
Right.